Kylian Mbappé has scored 85 goals in his first 100 games for Real Madrid. In almost any other era of football, and at almost any other club on the planet, a statistical return of that magnitude would be enough to grant a player the keys to the city, an untouchable status within the dressing room, and the unconditional adoration of the stands. But if you were watching closely as the final whistle blew against Espanyol last weekend, or if you happened to see the images of a private yacht drifting off the coast of Sardinia, while the Bernabeu was engulfed in the tension of a potential trophyless season, you would realize that at Real Madrid, goals are merely a currency, and right now, Mbappé's account is running dangerously close to bankruptcy. The media is currently fixated on a vacation. They are talking about the optics of a 27-year-old superstar sunbathing in Cagliari with Esther Exposito, while his teammates were grinding out a result in a high-stakes La Liga fixture. They are pointing to the frequency of his muscular issues, 5 separate injuries since December 2025, resulting in 53 days on the sidelines, as a sign of physical decline or a lack of professional discipline. But the real story isn't found in the medical reports or the social media feeds of Spanish tabloids. The real story is found in the silence of the Valdebebas training ground and the cold, clinical distance developing between the world's most expensive free agent and a dressing room that has decided it no longer needs him to find its soul. To understand how we reached this point of systematic isolation, we have to look back at the moment Mbappé walked off the pitch against Real Betis. It wasn't the injury itself that sent shockwaves through the coaching staff. It was the way he brushed past Álvaro Arbeloa. There was no explanation, no brief tactical exchange, and no acknowledgement of the collective effort. There was only a visible, radiating frustration, a star who felt the orbit of the team was no longer revolving around him. At Real Madrid, the brotherhood is not just a PR slogan. It is a defensive mechanism. Under Arbeloa, the hierarchy has shifted toward a collective martyrdom, where players like Jude Bellingham and Vinicius Jr. have branded themselves as the tireless guardians of the crest. When Mbappé seeks a second medical opinion in Paris, or flies to Italy during a recovery period, he isn't just managing his body. He is inadvertently signaling to the rest of the squad that his journey is a solo venture. The images of him returning to Madrid just minutes before kickoff against Espanyol were described by club officials as lonely. That is not a description of a flight itinerary. That is a description of a man who has become a ghost in his own house. While 85 goals suggest a player at his peak, the atmosphere at Valdebebas suggests a body that the Madrid organism is starting to reject. This is not a tactical crisis. This is an institutional excommunication. Let us examine the immediate aftermath of that tense victory over Espanyol. While the Spanish press was busy tracking a private jet over the Mediterranean, the true narrative of the weekend was quietly solidifying on social media. Hours after the final whistle, Jude Bellingham uploaded a seemingly innocuous photograph. It was a picture of him standing shoulder to shoulder with Vinicius Jr., both exhausted, both victorious. The caption was concise, yet heavily pregnant with subtext, fighting to the last breath. It is a young superstar praising his teammate after a grueling, essential victory in a tight La Liga race. But in the hyper-political, ruthlessly scrutinized ecosystem of the Real Madrid dressing room, where every public gesture is weighed and measured, that is not a post-match celebration. That is a declaration of borders. It is a very public framing of who is willing to bleed in the trenches and who is currently perceived as a tourist. To understand this dynamic, we must look at the structural hierarchy of Álvaro Arbeloa's squad. According to deep-seated reports from Marca, the dressing room is completely, unequivocally behind Vinicius, and structurally, this makes perfect sense. Vinicius Jr. represents the ultimate Madrid redemption arc. He is a player who survived years of mockery, immense tactical pressure, and external hostility to forge himself into the undisputed king of the Bernabeu. He earned his status through visible suffering and absolute loyalty to the collective. Jude Bellingham, recognizing this immediately upon his arrival, aligned himself with that struggle. They formed a brotherhood built on shared sacrifice. Kylian Mbappé, conversely, arrived as an anointed savior. He brought a staggering return of 85 goals in his first 100 matches. A feat of pure individual genius. But goals do not buy you entry into a brotherhood forged in trauma. He did not endure the growing pains of this specific squad. He is a statistical anomaly living outside the emotional core of the team. And when the collective faces adversity, as they are now with the threat of a second consecutive trophyless season. The dressing room instinctively protects its own. They retreat into the bunker, and they close the heavy steel door. This brings us to the most deafening detail of the entire weekend: the absolute silence of Kylian Mbappé. In previous months, a victory, even one he missed due to injury, would be met with the customary digital applause. A string of fire emojis on Bellingham's post, a congratulatory comment on Vinicius's page. It is the modern footballer's basic obligation to maintain the illusion of unity, to project a unified front to the media. But following Bellingham's impassioned battle cry, Mbappé's digital footprint was completely blank. No likes, no supportive comments, no shared stories. Nothing but the echoing silence of a man vacationing in Cagliari. Nobody is talking about this lack of digital interaction, but it is precisely where the fracture becomes undeniably visible. In the modern game, the deliberate withholding of public support between two alpha superstars is an active, aggressive choice. It confirms the underlying logic of this crisis. Bellingham and Vinicius are establishing a culture that demands absolute emotional and physical alignment. Mbappé, frustrated by constant muscular injuries and seeking refuge in his private life, chooses distance. Therefore, the isolation is no longer just a feeling at Valdebebas. It is an acknowledged, quietly escalating Cold War. To truly comprehend the depth of this escalating Cold War, we must pivot away from the digital battleground of social media and return to the physical confines of the stadium. We must look at the tunnel footage from the aftermath of the Real Betis match. When Kylian Mbappé was substituted, carrying a visible, simmering frustration regarding his latest muscular issue, the cameras captured an interaction, or rather, a glaring lack thereof, with manager Álvaro Arbeloa. As Mbappé walked off the pitch, Arbeloa approached, offering a customary gesture of managerial inquiry. Mbappé barely offered a passing glance. He brushed past his manager with a chilling, unapologetic indifference, refusing to explain his physical state or acknowledge the tactical adjustment. Now, the generous reading is that this was merely the heat of the moment. It is easy to frame it as the natural reaction of a hyper-competitive athlete angry at his own body for betraying him for the 5th time since December. But if you analyze the body language, and if you understand the political architecture of Real Madrid, that is not a heat-of-the-moment frustration. That is a public dismissal of authority. Álvaro Arbeloa is not just a tactician. He was appointed as a custodian of the Madrid identity. His power within the dressing room stems directly from his alignment with the Brotherhood, with players like Vinicius and Bellingham, who fiercely enforce his cultural demands on the pitch. When Mbappé dismisses Arbeloa in front of the cameras, he is not just snubbing a coach. He is challenging the entire ecosystem that Arbeloa represents. He is signaling that his statistical output of 85 goals grants him an operational immunity that supersedes the collective rules of the dressing room. And this brings us to the secret revelation that nobody in the mainstream Spanish press is properly contextualizing: the frantic ringing of phones in the Real Madrid boardroom. When Mbappé's private jet touched down in Madrid from Cagliari, just minutes before the team was scheduled to face Espanyol, sources at Marca reported that the phones of high-ranking club officials were ringing incessantly. Why the absolute panic? Mbappé was injured. He wasn't going to step onto the grass anyway. The panic was not about a missed tactical meeting. The panic was born from the sudden, terrifying realization that the club had completely lost control of the optics, and more importantly, they had lost control of the player. The hierarchy at the Santiago Bernabéu understands narrative manipulation better than anyone in world football. They knew that the juxtaposition of Vinicius fighting tooth and nail against Espanyol, while their marquee, era-defining superstar, was stepping off a yacht in Italy, was an institutional nightmare. But the frantic phone calls revealed a deeper anxiety. It revealed that Arbeloa does not have the political capital to discipline Mbappé, and the boardroom is paralyzed, terrified of alienating a player they spent half a decade trying to sign. Mbappé's trip to Italy was not a careless vacation to escape football. It was a calculated physical withdrawal from an environment that he feels is actively trying to subjugate him. He is watching the dressing room build a religion around Vinicius Jr., and he is watching the manager actively facilitate it. So, he removes himself entirely. He goes to Paris for a second medical opinion, bypassing the club's own medical staff. He goes to Sardinia to recover on his own terms. This is the ultimate, tragic paradox of Kylian Mbappé's tenure in the Spanish capital. He is the deadliest striker in the league, an absolute phenomenon in front of goal, yet he has never looked smaller within the political framework of the club. Amidst this institutional panic and the silent condemnation of the dressing room, a dissenting voice has emerged. We cannot analyze this crisis without examining the defense. French journalist Frédéric Hermel, a veteran observer of the Madrid-Paris dynamic, recently published a defense of the forward that bordered on the theatrical. Watching the Spanish press sharpen their knives over the Cagliari vacation, Hermel noted, "If this continues, people will soon blame Mbappé for the death of the legendary bullfighter Manolete. He is being turned into the scapegoat for Real's failed season. When the machinery of the club breaks down, and facing a second consecutive season without a major trophy certainly constitutes a severe breakdown, the ecosystem requires a blood sacrifice. The brotherhood that Arbeloa and Vinicius have constructed cannot fail. It can only be failed by those who lack the requisite devotion." Now, the generous reading of this entire saga is exactly what Hermel implies. Kylian Mbappé is merely a 27-year-old athlete adhering strictly to medical advice to protect a failing body. The generous reading is that a player who has suffered 5 separate muscular injuries and missed 53 days of football since December 2025 has entirely lost faith in the club's medical department. His trip to Paris for a second opinion was not an act of treason, it was an act of physical self-preservation. Furthermore, the club itself authorized his rest. From this perspective, the outrage over a yacht in Italy is a manufactured hysteria, designed to deflect blame from the tactical and structural failings of the squad. The less generous reading, however, takes us into the darker, psychological reality of elite football. The less generous reading is that the physical injuries have merely served as a catalyst for a deep, psychological resignation. Mbappé has recognized the impenetrable wall of the Vinicius-Bellingham axis. He understands that no matter how many times he finds the back of the net, he will never be the emotional epicenter of this specific iteration of Real Madrid. Instead of fighting to dismantle that wall, or bleeding to prove his worth to the brotherhood, he has surrendered to the isolation. He has accepted his role as the beautiful, isolated mercenary. That is why there was no digital support for Bellingham's battle cry. That is why he brushed past his manager in the tunnel against Real Betis. He is no longer trying to belong. He is simply existing within the statistics. But in Madrid, existing as a statistical anomaly, while the collective suffers, is a dangerous game. It is a slow, quiet abdication of the throne he was brought in to inherit. A muscular injury takes weeks to heal, but how long does it take to heal a completely severed trust within a dressing room? That is the question hanging over Valdebebas right now. This weekend, Real Madrid faces Barcelona in El Clasico. But make no mistake, for Kylian Mbappé, this is not a football match. This is a tribunal. If he recovers in time to step onto the grass, he is not just facing the Catalan defense, he is facing the ruthless judgment of the Bernabeu. If he fails to deliver, or worse, if he appears disconnected from the collective suffering of the team, the whistles will be deafening. But consider the alternative. What if he doesn't play? What if he sits in the VIP box, or watches from his home in Paris, and Vinicius Jr. leads this brotherhood to a bloody, hard-fought victory over their bitter rivals? That might be the final nail in the coffin. A victory without him validates the brotherhood. It proves that the 85 goals are a luxury, not a necessity. There is a deep, lingering anxiety here. We look back at the Zidane era, at the original Galacticos, where massive egos found a way to coexist under the blinding lights of Madrid. You have to wonder if this club will ever find that balance again, or if we have entered an era where you must either be a martyr for the badge, or an enemy of the state. Right now, Mbappé is dangerously close to the latter. I want you to really think about the psychology of this situation. Is Kylian Mbappé destroying his own legacy in Madrid through his own physical and emotional withdrawal? Or is the dressing room actively refusing to let him in because they are terrified of his individual power? Tell me in the comments what you actually think. Come back to this video when the final whistle blows in El Clasico this weekend, because the fallout from that match will either force a peace treaty or detonate the dressing room entirely. If this kind of analysis looking past the statistics and into the psychology and politics of football is what you come here for, hit subscribe. We don't just watch the game here. We read the room.